Welcome YouTube to another D&D Fridays. Today we'll be taking a look at just some tips and tricks that concerns with world building as a whole. Before we continue, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and comment on down below. Without further ado, let's get to building ourselves a new country within whatever world your campaign is in.
Let's go.
So when it comes to world building, I think there's probably two approaches to it: a bottom up or a top down approach. Uh, uh, I, I really feel like it's kind of like two polar opposites of each other. So from a real bottoms up approach, to me, that's really focusing in on like a city or a district or whatever, something small, really putting forth a lot of effort there and not really doing a lot of prepping or something like that of a city halfway across the world just yet. Just really letting players really dictate what you need to prep. Where a top down approach is really focusing in on the continent, the planet, whatever the large overarching area, and then sprinkling in cities, districts, whatever, and then really, okay, the players are here. Let me focus in on that area now.
Yeah, I think to your point, right? It's two different perspectives of how to build up this world. I think from a bottom up approach, you would focus more on each individual character or NPC that you're trying to build and what that particular character would and wouldn't do, and build out from there, right? How would they act in their house, in their neighborhood? And you start small, right? You don't worry about the city or the country or the world, right? You start with that singular NPC and kind of build out, or your two or three NPCs and build them out a little bit. And then from your top down perspective, obviously you start at the abstract and work your way down, and that's where you start looking at culture and behave, generic culture, generic behaviors, um, uh, differences in how somebody living in the desert is different from somebody living in the mountains, which is somebody different in the plains, and start laying those out in abstract ideas and working your way down, right, top down. Um, so, and I think there's advantages and disadvantages to each of those. Obviously, if you start from the bottom up, you don't have to worry so much about what the world is or customs or culture or stuff like that. You just worry about the NPC that you're currently focused on, or the handful of NPCs that you're worried on. When you go from the top down, it's obviously a much bigger undertaking.
And I feel like there's definitely good times to use either which one. I feel like the bottom up approach works pretty smooth for especially for like one shots or campaigns that last like 6 sessions, stuff like that. Where feel like top down approach worked pretty well for campaigns that might span like 3 4 years or something like that. So you can have that idea of, okay, I have this idea of what this continent is going to be like. I know the players are going to start in this town. Let me focus in on this town, but I know what the desert is going to be like you said, or the coast or whatnot. So whenever the players do get there at some point, if they do, I have the idea of what the customs are going to be like and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely. I would think that these, even though they're polar opposites and you have to approach each method in a different way, kind of feel like they're also complementary and go hand in hand. And you can flip flop between both design aspects, right? If you're not really sure what you want the world to be like, but you have an idea of what you want, this small little village or this section of town to be like, you start there. And then as the campaign progresses, as you start getting more ideas or seeing how your group is interacting with the NPCs that you are creating, you can start building out these ideas of behaviors and cultures and customs and things like that, and start abstracting them up a little bit, and And if your campaign does last longer than a one shot or 5 or 6 sessions, then you can start potentially incorporating some of these things and looking at building the world top down as you continue to build out that campaign, right? So I think they're sort of complementary, or I should say complementary too.
Yeah, but I agree. Like, especially for, like you said, for more than a few sessions, I think they really mesh together really well. And depend on how much of either approach you do, it depends on what you're trying to get out of the campaign and what your players are really interested in and the like.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
when it comes to world building, I think that goes from everywhere. That's pretty much anything from how do NPCs act to how do the government, local government act, local militia, the governments for the entire country, or maybe even international disputes, stuff like that. So I think world building has so much different things to really think about when you're really creating something like that. And I
Yeah.
also think that world building isn't just a GM thing. I think players also comes into some of the world building as well. Maybe not for session 1 or 2, but I think for some of the mid to long lasting campaigns, I feel like players really have that option to really affect the world and world build as they would role play their characters.
Yeah, I think that you obviously are going to have the players impacting and changing how the world is functioning and set up, and you can definitely take inspiration from how they're interacting with your NPCs, right? And the campaign settings and things that you set for them, and take those and again abstract them out, or you get more specific with them to build out some of these other things that you might want later on in your campaign, and use them as inspiration for that.
Agree. And and also world building is probably one of those things that definitely gets better as you practice it. I think there's no like tried and true way of world building. I think the top down and bottom up are good skeleton frames to really think about when world building, but the whole nitty gritty of how the NPCs act and whatnot, I think that differs from world to world.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think that there's not a wrong or right answer with doing this either, right? You're gonna have to try things, see what sticks, what sticks to the wall, what doesn't stick to the wall. You're gonna have to go through many iterations of some of the ideas that you have. So to your point, right? This is something that you have to practice again and again and again, and you know you're going to be doing that every time you create a new character or a new scenario or a new combat encounter. You're technically world building in that regard. You just might not see it in that light to begin with, but the more you do that, the more comfortable you get, the more you can start expanding and building up the ideas and rearranging those ideas to build new encounters and new interactions and new ways to build out those NPCs that you want in your campaign.
And I think another tip for world building I would say is if you're at a loss for what to do for a town or whatever, take a look at some of the modules like maybe Storm King's Thunder or like Waterdeep or something like that to get some ideas, or even look at some real world examples like maybe go back centuries ago or something like that. For example, maybe look at the 1700s when the US was coming up as a country. Maybe some ideas from how that sprung together might fuel some of your world building ideas of how to create a government or how to create a country or whatever.
Yeah, I really like your idea of using real world examples if you're struggling to come up with something quote unquote imaginative, right? There are millions upon millions of different ideas and options just looking at the real world, anywhere from history, like you mentioned, to remote islands, to other countries, depending on where how you want to. what you want to focus in on, different climates, different uh, cultures, different religions, different governments. There's just so many different things out there in the real world you can fall back on as an example. And hey, borrowing from the real world, not illegal. And it's always it's a good place to start sometimes, because then you can build off of that. Just you need that little stepping stone. So I really like that idea.
Yep, agree. And world building can definitely be a lot of fun, as especially if you know your players already, you know what they might like. You can use little tidbits of information like that, and and it really stretches the imagination as well. So I would definitely say, let your imagination run wild when creating your world.
Yep. And to build off that a little bit, since you mentioned the players again, you could even use their backgrounds that they built as part of their character creation to help inform you on how you want to build out the world, right? And then they're playing a much deeper role in building out that world than they might even realize. So that's another good place to look for inspiration.
Yeah, yeah, I like that you brought it up. Like for instance, if a character in their backstory says that they don't really know much about their dad, maybe their dad is like a leader of another village or something like that,
Hmm.
and maybe that could be like a stepping stool for, okay, now we're getting out of this village. I now have this other village over here that I world build off that little tidbit of your backstory. And now you have a personal stake in
Right.
going to that village.
Right. Exactly. And now you've built a not only a story arc, but you've built another layer into your world, right? That can be uh, investigated and expanded on, and used to create that robust story that you want to create.
Agreed. And it, it's just so, I think world building has a lot of good feel good moments when you create this section of town or something, and your players really go through it and they enjoy themselves from it. Definitely, as mentioned before, really use those tidbits of knowledge to really create more things of that nature within your world or other worlds.
Sure.
If you have a good like world idea, maybe that could be good to publish it in a.
Publish it.
Yep.
Sure, you can always look for the side hustle as you're doing this and see if you can make it big. Yeah, that's definitely a side or a thing to keep in mind.
Yep. And I guess one more note, also in world building, if some other good places to really get some good spark of imagination, instead of just the modules or real world, is other fantasy realms, like maybe Game of Thrones or Harry Potter or something like that. Just don't name your Harry Potter thing Strixhaven,
Or Harry Potter for that matter.
because then you might have some folks knocking on your door to say, we need that name.
Yeah, yeah. You'd be looking at some copyright infringement there, but
At least in terms of if you try to publish that type of thing.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can definitely publish. But I think that's another good example is movies, books, TV shows. There are millions of examples of world building that goes on all around us every day that we can borrow ideas from and use elements of, right? This isn't Sometimes the world building can be pretty overwhelming and seem like a daunting task, but keep it simple, right? Don't don't try and create the next Westeros or um, the next Middle Earth, right? Keep it simple, and if you want to borrow elements from those worlds because you really really like those elements, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's kind of like, don't try to get in over your head with world building, because then I feel like it'll come crashing down on you. Um, know what you can and can't do in terms of what your limits are, and just focusing on what's fun to you. What do you think will be fun to the players, and do something like that. If you want to create that whole Middle Earth vibe, but you don't want to create it from scratch, maybe just take some ideas from Game of Thrones or whatever, The Hobbit or whatever, and just say, all right, I got these three things that really appeal to me. Let me work off of those things and focus in on those three things.
Exactly.
So definitely know how much you can bite off and just focus in on what you can and know you can do.
Yep.
And I think that especially applies to if you're a new GM. Definitely don't try not to take on anything too large when you're first starting out. Maybe keep it something small. Maybe you have this one show that you like. Maybe you borrow that world and maybe just tweak a few things to make it your own or something like that.
Yep. I think that's a great suggestion right there.
But all in all, I think world building is a super handy skill to have. It's definitely very rewarding when everybody has fun. And world building, both GM and players have a lot to say about world building. It's not just GM, even though I think the GM puts in a lot of upfront work. But I think a lot of the end in work and world building really comes from players and how they interact with your NPCs.
Yep.
Players will give you a lot of good information, so definitely don't discredit player involvement in world building.
They will make your world come alive.
Yep, and then just keep in mind what you want to do, what you can do, and then I think with all of that stuff, I think anybody can have a great world.
Agreed.
And without further ado, thank you for joining us in this D&D world, and keep y'all's lives geeky in the geek world.
Bye, everybody.